This is the true story of the night the Cold War almost ended the world, and why history barely remembers the man who stopped it. September 26, 1983. Just after midnight, inside a windowless bunker outside Moscow called Serpukhov 15. This is the command center of a top-secret system codenamed OKO, the Soviet Union's eye in the sky, a network of satellites built for one purpose: to watch American missile fields every second of every day for the first sign of launch. On duty tonight is Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, 44 years old, an engineer by training, not a career soldier, one of the men who helped write the very software now flashing in front of him. A wall panel comes alive, one word in bold red letters: launch. A siren tears through the bunker. The screen reports a single intercontinental ballistic missile, fired from a base in the United States, now arcing towards Soviet territory. Petrov's blood goes cold. Then, before he can even process it, the system updates. Not one missile, 4 more behind it, 5 in total, all inbound. His job, in this exact moment, is not complicated. It is absolute. Confirm the launch, report it up the chain of command. From there, Soviet military doctrine is unambiguous. A confirmed American nuclear strike triggers immediate retaliation, full scale, no hesitation, aimed squarely at the United States and its NATO allies.
He has, by his own later account, about 15 minutes before impact. 15 minutes, to be right. To understand why those 15 minutes were among the most dangerous in human history, you need to understand the year around them. Historians studying the Cold War today often point to 1983, not 1962's Cuban Missile Crisis, as the moment the world came closest to accidental nuclear war. Just 3 weeks before Petrov's shift, on September 1st, Soviet fighter jets shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian passenger plane that had drifted into Soviet airspace. All 269 people on board were killed, including a sitting United States congressman. The incident triggered global outrage, and President Ronald Reagan, only months earlier, had already labeled the Soviet Union an evil empire on international television. Behind closed doors in the Kremlin, the mood was closer to panic than confidence. Soviet leader Yuri Andropov and the KGB were operating under a standing intelligence directive, codenamed Operation Ryan, convinced that the United States and NATO were actively preparing a surprise nuclear first strike, possibly disguised as a routine military exercise. That fear wasn't paranoia without basis. Within weeks, a NATO war game called Able Archer 83 would push Soviet forces to quietly prepare their own retaliation, believing the exercise might be real.
This was the atmosphere Petrov was sitting inside of. A system on hair-trigger alert, a leadership expecting the worst, and a military doctrine that left almost no room for an operator, however senior, to simply say, "I don't believe the machine." Back inside the bunker, the room is chaos. Officers around Petrov are shouting, urging him to pick up the phone and pass the alert up the chain immediately. The computer itself is telling him the reliability of the launch data is highest, the system's own confidence score at maximum. But Petrov hesitates, and in that hesitation, he starts running through what he actually knows, not what the screen is telling him. First, if the United States were truly launching a first strike meant to cripple Soviet retaliation, it would never come as 5 missiles. A real attack, aimed at disabling an entire nuclear superpower, would mean hundreds of warheads launched simultaneously, overwhelming every defense at once. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. It looked less like an attack, and more like a mistake. Second, Petrov has a second source of information the satellites don't control: ground-based radar, which tracks objects as they cross the horizon. He checks it. Nothing. No radar confirmation, anywhere, of an inbound missile.
But ground radar has a limitation too. It can only detect a missile in its final minutes of flight, once it's close enough to see. So its silence isn't proof of anything. Not yet. It only gives him something the screaming computer didn't: a reason to wait. Petrov is left holding 2 impossible outcomes in his hands at once. If this is real, and he calls it a false alarm, Soviet cities burn without a single warning shot fired in their defense. If this is a glitch, and he reports it as an attack, His own report may be the single action that starts a nuclear war that didn't need to happen at all. He picks up the phone. He calls the duty officer at Central Command and says the words that go against everything the system was built to demand of him. This is a false alarm. The system is malfunctioning.
Then comes the part almost no dramatization of this story properly captures: the waiting. Petrov has made his call, but he has no way to know, in that moment, whether he's just made the right decision or the worst mistake of his life. He sits back, watching the clock, watching the same screen that told him the world was ending, and waits to see who was right, him or the machine. 10 minutes pass, then 12, then the full 15 minutes he estimated for impact come and go. Nothing happens. No detonation. No confirmation from any other station. Moscow and the world remain exactly as they were an hour earlier. A formal investigation afterward identified the cause: a rare freak alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds above North Dakota, striking the Soviet satellites at precisely the angle their sensors were trained to read as the heat plume of a missile launch. A defense system built at a cost of trillions of rubles, undone by sunlight bouncing off clouds.
Given what he'd just done, you might expect Stanislav Petrov to have been celebrated as a hero the moment the sun came up. He wasn't. Soviet military culture had no space for the story of an officer who defied the system, even if defying it turned out to be correct. Instead of praise, Petrov was quietly reprimanded, officially for failing to properly log every detail in his command notebook during the minutes the alarms were sounding. Unofficially, historians believe the incident was an embarrassment the Soviet military establishment simply wanted buried, since it exposed a serious flaw in a system they had spent years insisting was flawless. Petrov was eventually pushed out of his role, reassigned, and left the military altogether. By his own account, he suffered a nervous breakdown in the years that followed. He spent his later life largely unrecognized, living on a modest pension in a small apartment outside Moscow, his role in that night classified for over a decade. It wasn't until well after the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 that journalists and historians pieced the story together and brought it to the world, earning him, decades late, international recognition, including the Dresden Peace Prize.
Some historians today still debate exactly how close the world came to war that night. Petrov sat several layers down the chain of command, and any final launch decision would have rested with officers above him. But every serious account of that night agrees on the same point. When the machine reported the end of the world, it was one man's doubt, not any general or any computer, that kept the phone from ringing any further up the chain. The Soviet Union spent decades and untold fortunes building one of the most feared military machines in human history. Thousands of nuclear warheads, a global satellite early warning grid, underground command bunkers designed to survive almost anything. And on the one night that machine was tested for real, none of that mattered as much as the judgment of one tired, off-script engineer. Stanislav Petrov passed away in 2017 at 77 years old, largely uncelebrated in the country he had quietly saved. The Soviet Union itself ceased to exist in 1991, less than a decade after that night. But the 15 minutes inside that Serpukhov 15 bunker remain, by the account of nearly every historian who has studied the Cold War, one of the closest moments the world has ever come to nuclear catastrophe, a reminder that even the most powerful systems ever built still depend, in the end, on the judgment of the people inside them.